The Sports Source is brought to you by Fast Frame, with exciting Vol sports prints now available.
You are watching East Tennessee's first and only year-round sports talk show on television. This is The Sports Source with your host, John Pennington.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Welcome into The Sports Source. Good to have you here. You'll notice there's purple on the set. Somebody tweeted earlier and said, you can have purple lights. Wasn't planning on it, but when you tweet, I respond. Purple shirt as well. We have a Prince question later in the show. This is great. You can go ahead and start sending me your answers. What Prince song title best sums up your feelings about Butch Jones to this date? We'll ask the panel a little later in the show, but you'd be surprised how many news stories there were on and off the field for Tennessee this week, especially football. We'll get into all of those starting right now. First segment of our show brought to you by Tennova Healthcare. Nobody has the volunteer state, especially East Tennessee, covered in terms of healthcare like Tennova. 17 hospitals, 2,600 beds, 2,400 doctors, and nearly 10,000 employees. And folks, I can tell you, one satisfied customer that is me. I trust them implicitly. I trusted them with my life, and I hope you will trust them as well. Tennova Healthcare. Learn more at tennova.com. All right. Like I said, busy week on the sports front, surprisingly. Well, we're joined by, let me introduce these guys first, might help. Bob Hodge, Mike Strange, Russell Wilson. Russell's back with us.
I wish.
If you were Russell Wilson, if you're Russell Wilson, I wouldn't have to pay you. I don't pay you anyway. Chuck Cavaleris, all these guys are free. Good to have you guys with us. Dave Lawson, UT strength and conditioning coach, they're not saying he was fired. They're not saying left on his own. It's just he's gone. There was a philosophical difference, they say, between the football coaches and the overall head of UT's strength and conditioning program. This is a guy that came with Butch Jones from Cincinnati. It's not a complete surprise because he didn't handle the team in spring. It was announced Mike Zerzan his assistant would take over football in the spring. One would assume Mike Zerzan is going to be the guy moving forward, but here's the question. There's some people out there wondering, does this have anything to do with the lawsuit? They say it's philosophical differences, but he knew this guy. He brought him from Cincinnati. What do you think about the reasons given? Difference in philosophy. You buying it?
Yeah, I'm going to buy it because I also follow the Minnesota Vikings. They changed the strength coach because they had a difference in philosophy. The reason that they changed him was because they were having too many shoulder injuries. So Guess what? And I think right now in football, you do have it going two different directions on how you need to work out. A lot of people are old-fashioned. You get in there and you bench press until you can't bench press anymore. And so I think, difference in philosophy, I'm buying it.
Yeah, they're suggesting that it's not so much the explosive power as it is you need the lateral movement and more about flexibility because of the growth in the spread offense. And you do have a disproportionate number of shoulder injuries at UT. You buying what they're selling in terms of difference of philosophies? Is that simple?
I'll buy a difference of philosophy because we don't know what else to buy that's behind a cloak of secrecy. What goes on? Dave Lawson would have rather done anything than talk to the media. We never got to know him, and so I think we're trying to attach it to an explanation of some timely things. Now you got a bunch of shoulder injuries, you got a lawsuit, so we're looking to peg it on something time-wise, but I'll just have to accept difference of philosophy.
You guys accept that?
Well, if you're looking to peg it on something time-wise, I think you look at all the injuries. They had, about half the roster out for spring practice, so I think that's probably, if you're going to assume that it could be the Title IX thing, why not assume that it could be just the injuries as well?
Why don't you adjust your philosophy then? If it's a difference in philosophy, you've been together that long.
Well, it's easier to whack a coach than it is to change the program.
Exactly.
And the coach may not have wanted to adjust his philosophy. He may think he's right.
The thing is, if he goes to a different program with a different philosophy, he may be right.
Yeah, and there also, remember last year before the season, there were a lot of non-contact injuries too. And I think there's a lot of things when you start adding it up at the end of the day. And Butch Jones is going to look at everything. He's looking at how many players Alabama's losing, how many players Florida's losing, and you got to make changes if you're constantly trying to make yourself better. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, okay, now that gets into the next question, which is, what does this tell you about Butch Jones? Because going into a big season, highest expectations. First time you've been picked, you're going to be picked to win the East since 2005, I think. Haven't been picked to win the East since 2005. This is going to be the first time since then. He goes out and he fires his defensive coordinator. thinks he can make an upgrade with Bob Shoop, grabs him. He decides I'm going to change my strength and conditioning coach. Those two pretty big changes on the eve of, and he also had a tight ends coach that left on his own. But you get two of your biggest slots gone before a big season. What's that say about Butch Jones too? Does that tell you anything?
I think it says that he knows it's big season. I think it says that he wants to make the most of the big season. And the fact that these guys had been with him for a while makes me think that Butch Jones is not going to leave any stone unturned to get where he wants the program to go. And even though you've had a long-term relationship, I think we've all heard of coaches, college and pro both, who are too loyal to some of their assistants. And if you think that you can make yourself better, as a fan, that's what you're after. That's what you want.
Tennessee fans of the last 30 years have seen the two extremes. You had Johnny Majors, who, man, he kept his assistants' feet to the fire, and there was a constant churn. Nick Saban did that. Then you saw a lot of success under Philip Fulmer, who his guys stayed in place for years. Thoughts on what this says about Butch Jones, if anything?
I think one thing it says to me is for the average fan, they may not realize how important this position is because of how much time this coach spends with the players. It tells me that Butch Jones recognizes that. What worked at Central Michigan, what worked at Cincinnati may not necessarily work at Tennessee.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at all the guys that Butch brought with him from Cincinnati to Knoxville, there's only two left. Stripling, the defensive line coach, and Mahoney, the offensive line coach. But Bajakian's gone, Jancic is gone, strength coach is gone, a couple of others. So it's time for
both coordinators and his strength and conditioning coach that he brought down here have now moved on, which I think gets to what Chuck was talking about. You get down here, and it's not like he hasn't had success. The guy's gotten better every single year across the board. More talent, more wins. More butts in the seats, more donors. Every year it gets a little better under this guy, but I think he's learning that, okay, we're going to have to take it to another step. Mike, I'll let you close it out.
Well, I'll just sum up what these guys said. Well, you know what? He's at the big boy. The big boy, not to take anything away from the MAC or Cincinnati, but he's at the big boy level now, and I think if he's aware and making adjustments and realizing what it takes to succeed in that Shark Tank, that's probably a good thing for him.
It's a gator tank.
I think it's a net positive for Vol fans. I think one of the concerns, well, this guy can't recruit when he gets here from where he's been. Well, he did, he can. And then it was, well, these coaches aren't going to be good enough. Well, he's going out and getting bigger and better people. So Dave Lawson out. Likely Mike Zerzan will continue to run over the football program. When we come back, we'll talk about changes coming to Neyland Stadium eventually. They're looking at renovations. Will the small guy get priced out? But right next, the KPD has made a change. They're going to make courtesy calls to UT anymore. Is that big a deal? And we'll also talk about media vendettas. We'll discuss with Russell Wilson when we come back on the Sports Source.